Time having arrived, I call the meeting of the Committee on Finance to order for today, March 4th, 2024. If you could just please rise and help us salute our beautiful flag. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, councilors and guests, welcome to our FinCom. And without further ado, Mr. Clerk.
Item 1, we have the acceptance of the minutes of the February 20th, 2024 Finance Committee meeting.
That will be accepted and placed on file.
Ordered that the following named sum be and the same is hereby transferred as the same was submitted by the mayor as follows. Appropriation of $76,181. The funds will be used for the purchase of departmental equipment. From the United States Department of Justice, $76,181. To the Brockton Police Department, $76,181. Invited Brenda Perez, Chief of Police or Designee. Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer. And before we get to that, there is an amendment we actually need on this order.
All right. Councilor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I make a motion to amend the order so that the language reads as follows. That the City Council authorizes the acceptance and expenditure of the total grant funds in the amount of $76,181 from United States Department of Justice, $76,181 to the Brockton Police Department, $76,181. The funds will be used for the purchase of departmental equipment.
Second.
That's in the form of a motion.
Correct.
The motion has been properly made in second. All those in favor? All those opposed?
Question comes on the amendment.
Now the question comes on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment? All those opposed? It's been amended.
And now you can have...
Now we can have either the chief, Ms. Gomes. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. Eugenia Lopes, grant writer.
Gomes, Lopes.
That's okay. Eugenia Lopes, grant writer for the Brockton Police Department. Good evening, council members. Good evening, President Rodriguez. So the Justice Assistance Grant, also known as the JAG grant, is a grant that is applied for through Plymouth County. So the police department is a subrecipient of this grant. There is no match for the police department. And as mentioned, we're using these funds for the purchase of departmental equipment.
Anyone has a question or a comment?
Motion to recommend favorably.
Second.
A motion has been properly made in second. All those in favor? All those opposed? It carries. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Apologies for the Lopes and Gomes.
That's okay. Thank you.
You know how we are with all these names. I thought you would have one of those in the middle somewhere. Number 3, sir.
Item number 3, ordered that the following named sum be and the same is hereby transferred as the same was submitted by the mayor as follows. Transfer of $2,500 from City Council part-time salaries, $2,500, to City Council personal services overtime, $2,500, in order to cover unanticipated expenses for the remainder of the fiscal year. Invited Timothy J. Cruz, City Clerk. Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer.
Mr. Cruz.
If you don't mind, I'm going to stay at this point in this spot. Just to let you know, this is a transfer staff overtime due to the fact that we took over the Finance Committee meetings from the auditor's office. We don't use a lot of overtime, but these meetings, as you know, quite often, as in a month ago, run much longer than City Council, and we'll need some overtime to finish the year. And I'll take any questions.
Favorably.
Second.
A motion has been properly made in second. All those in favor? All those opposed? It carries. Thank you, sir. Number 4.
Item 4, ordered that the following named sum be and the same is hereby transferred as the same was submitted by the mayor as follows. Transfer is $5,200 from City Clerk temporary seasonal, $1,200. City Clerk out of grade, $4,000. To City Clerk personal services overtime, $5,200, in order to cover unanticipated expenses for the remainder of the fiscal year. Invited Timothy J. Cruz, City Clerk. Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer.
Mr. Cruz.
Thank you. And as you know, my office has 2 budgets. On the other side, the City Clerk side, we've done a couple of projects this year trying to clean up some of the older records and all that have been not paid much attention to for years and years, and the overtime ran a little high. And again, we do very little overtime. You can see the dollar number is not a lot, but to finish the year out, I asked for this transfer from money in my office just through that line item so we can finish some of the projects on digitizing and organizing records that are years behind.
Motion to recommend favorably.
Second.
A motion has been properly made in second. All those in favor? All those opposed? It carries. Thank you, sir. Number 5.
Number 5, ordered that the following named sum be and the same is hereby transferred as the same was submitted by the mayor as follows. Transfer of $450,000 from Stormwater Certified Retained Earnings, $450,000, to Stormwater Personal Services Non-Overtime, $226,251, Stormwater Purchase of Service, $223,434, Stormwater Goods and Supplies, $315, in order to cover unanticipated expenses for the remainder of the fiscal year. Invited Patrick Hill, DPW Commissioner, Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer.
Mr. Clarkson, welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. Just a bit of a background on this issue. As you may remember, for those that were here and for those that weren't, I'll give a little refresher. During the budget hearings last June, the City Council, in anticipation of passing a new stormwater ordinance, significantly reduced the budget for the stormwater enterprise. And as you know, the council then put together a revised stormwater ordinance that it was anticipated would be a leaner operation, less costly, and presumably would collect less revenue. Although the ordinance has been complete, the compilation of that revised stormwater authority is not yet finalized. I'm actually meeting with the mayor and the council president and the DPW commissioner later this week to try to move that forward. As a result, there has been very little collections in stormwater so far this fiscal year because it has not been formally set up. So although the operation has been reduced, there is still a stormwater budget and expenses within that budget. So what we're proposing to be able to complete the expenses for this fiscal year for the portion of the department that's left, because we did establish this as an enterprise fund, there are certified retained earnings that we can then transfer for this year to cover this year's expenses. I do anticipate before the end of the year the setup of the Stormwater Commission will be complete, the fee structure will be voted, and for next year, there'll be sufficient revenue to cover those expenses. But to get through the rest of this year, we are requesting this transfer so that the budget that remains, that you approved, has sufficient revenues. The consequence of not doing that would be that the enterprise fund would finish the year in a deficit, and the general fund would have to cover those expenses. But since there are sufficient funds on hand, as I noted to you in the email I sent over the weekend, the amount of certified retained earnings is at just over $762,000. So there are sufficient funds on hand to handle this, and I believe this is a fiscally responsible way of addressing the operations of the Stormwater Authority for this year. Pat Hill is also here if you have any questions. And I did earlier today, fulfilling a request from last meeting of Councilor Derencourt, that sent you the detailed budget update for all of the departments, but included in that is the current stormwater budget and the current stormwater revenue.
Okay, I have Councilor Farwell, Derencourt, and then Thompson. Anybody else?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to expand on this a little bit, the $226,251, we charge back to the stormwater account a certain portion of some salaries because the people in the DPW office perform stormwater activities, and I think that's only fair and certainly proper. You may remember that when we made the change in the stormwater ordinance, we don't, if my memory serves, I know we don't charge single-family homeowners, and I think up to two-family are exempt. We obviously will have a fee structure that will cover others, including businesses, but the history of this was that
many of us, if not all of us, were really concerned about the bills that were coming out for stormwater fees, bills that were $15,000, $20,000, $25,000. So we really do need to do this for the remainder of this fiscal year, and then I'm confident, and it's written into the ordinance, that when the newly constituted Stormwater Authority meets, and the DPW Commissioner is the ex officio chair, again, if my memory is still okay, the mandate is to charge the lowest possible fee to businesses and to those affected so that we fund what we have to do, but we don't make this a cash cow where we overcharge people and try to amass a large retained revenue account. And I thank the CFO and his staff for working on this, and I look forward to other comments, and certainly we should favorably recommend this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councilor Rancourt.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to ask the DPW Commissioner, Pat Hill, this question. Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. In regard to this transfer, right, my question to you is that, will you have any other transfer requests from this point forward in regard to the enterprise for this fiscal year?
I don't anticipate any more costs, councilors. We went through the budget to determine what services were going to be needed to get us through the rest of this fiscal year. Some of these are services that were traditionally taken by the general fund through the highway account. For next year, we're already looking at possibly putting those costs back into the highway budget. But as it stands now, what we've requested should get us through the year.
So I just want to make sure that we hear this. So from this point forward, there will be no more requests of fund. Is that correct?
Not that I can anticipate, no, sir.
So there's a possibility that you might come back.
I highly doubt that I'll be back here asking you, certainly not for personal services, certainly not for general services that are going to be finalized, such as street sweeping, removal and debris, catch basin cleaning. All those services are monitored. When we hit a point where we can no longer expend any money, then the services will stop until next fiscal year.
So, there you go. This is very interesting. So if you get to a point where you don't have enough fund to continue the service that you have an obligation to fund, that service will stop. Is that right?
No. No. So the way that we've calculated this, and this is a year-to-year thing, we typically do the exact same amount of service when it comes to street sweeping, sweeping removal, and catch basin cleaning. So those services are dialed in pretty much for every year. We have the cost because we have the contracts. So we know that we clean X amount of catch basins every year. We know exactly how much that's going to cost. So we've anticipated a full program. Sometimes we don't get through the full program. In that case, certainly these funds would remain in retained earnings. Same with the street sweeping debris. So I don't anticipate those services will grow because we've funded them full in nature, and sometimes we can't even accommodate that.
So this council, how do I put this? And I'm asking you those questions for a reason, and I just want to make sure. I understand that last year I wasn't here, right? But I'm here now. So from your own word that until the end of this fiscal year, we will not see your face again coming back to this council requesting for any fund. Is that correct?
For the stormwater, I don't know.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, Mr. Hill. I had two questions, and you kind of briefly touched upon my first question as to what services are provided through this fund. You said catch basin cleaning, the street sweeping. Are those what other services are paid for through this fund?
So through this fund, we offer or we use consulting services for GIS as well. The GIS analyst is based out of the stormwater. He's entirely paid out of the stormwater. All the services, consulting services that assist all the other departments in the city are done through this consultant, through our GIS technician. So we have a very small amount to get us through the rest of the year with the consulting assistance. We do anticipate having to revise the current stormwater billing to go back in and apply the new ordinance. We're likely going to need a consultant to kind of review that. I have my business manager currently working on that, but we'd like a second set of eyes on that before the next round of bills go out. We kind of have an anticipation of what that looks like, but before we send any future billing out, we want to make sure it's 100% correct.
Great, we appreciate that. Secondly, you said that potentially next fiscal year, you're going to look at maybe splitting up some of these expenses and not potentially look at your other operational accounts to pay for some of these expenses. Is that what you stated?
So some of the, if you look through the personal services item in the stormwater budget, you'll see, as Councilor Farwell alluded to, portions of people's salaries that were paid for out of the Stormwater Commission or out of the stormwater budget in, I guess, to address the concern about inflating or, kind of catering to a specific department with a fee. We've taken those costs and kind of reallocated them back to say the engineering department, where a couple of our engineers were paid 25% for. The city engineer, we've for next year's budget, we've brought him back into the engineering budget. We've taken some of these services and put them back into the highway budget, and only kept the essential functions of this department within the budget.
Okay, understood. Streamline it a little bit. Okay, understood. My second question was actually for the mayor who just stepped out. I don't know if you, here he comes. Mr. Mayor, I just had one quick question regarding this. I know.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. I know part of the new stormwater ordinance required a commission to develop policy and develop fees and everything like that. My understanding is we don't have all our members yet. I was just wondering, what's the status of appointment for these members?
So the president and I are meeting this week. The president appoints 2, I appoint 1. So Moses and I are meeting this Thursday to finalize that.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate that.
Thank
you. And those are, would they come before us for approval?
I don't know the answer, but I'd put them before you. Just short. I'm happy to do that. I just don't know I don't know that answer, but I'd be happy to.
But regardless, they'll be coming. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
All right. That was my question. I appreciate that.
Point of information through you. The developer is coming here to look at this tonight. I was just seeing if he's here. He's en route, just to let you know. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, anyone else?
Motion to recommend favorably?
Second.
Motion has been properly made in second. All those in favor? All those opposed? It carries. Number 6, Mr. Clerk, and I think this is another one that
Correct.
is going to get another
Needs
correction,
amendment.
right?
So ordered that the following name sum be and the same is hereby transferred as the same was submitted by the mayor as follows. Appropriation of $30,447.62 from Commonwealth of Massachusetts Department of Fire Services, $30,447.62 to the Fire Department, $447.62. This is a non-matching grant with no cost to the city. Funds will be used for the purchase of 4 sets of gear for the newest recruits and partially cover the cost of a secondary set of gear for the 16 recruits hired last year. Invited Brian Nardelli, Fire Chief, Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer, and I do believe that Councilor Thompson has an amendment.
Go ahead, Mr. Counselor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I make a motion to amend the order so that the language reads as follows. That the City Council authorizes the acceptance and expenditure of the total grant funds in the amount of $30,447.62 from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Department of Fire Services, $30,447.62 to The Fire Department, $30,447.62. This is a non-matching grant with no cost to the city. The funds will be used for the purchase of 4 sets of gear for the newest recruits and partially cover the cost of a secondary set of gear for the 16 recruits hired last year.
Councilors, a motion has been made. Did we get a second?
Second.
A motion has been made to amend this order. All those in favor of the amendment? All those opposed? Now on the motion as amended. Go for it, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. How are you? Good evening, councilors. So this has been a 5-year process, this grant from the Department of Fire Services. This is the sunset year, so we've been working, lobbying amongst the fire chiefs to get this back reset for the next coming years. This grant will cover the 4 that we currently have in drill school, as well as partially for 9 others, as well as then my line item in the budget to purchase gear would cover the other ones from the last class. So we have 2 sets of gear for every working firefighter. The reason for that is they have a fire tonight, and the whole, shower within the hour, get the carcinogens off you, it has to be put into an extractor, and then they have to have another set of gear to wear with that. So all gear is custom made now. It's not like the old raincoats of years ago. So there is an expense that goes along with it. So every member of the department has 2 sets of gear. That's what this would work out to be.
Any questions?
Motion to recommend favorably back to the full city council.
Second.
A motion has been properly made in second. All those in favor? On the motion, sir.
I apologize, on the motion. Chief, just quickly, are these the fire suits that are that don't have the PFAS? No.
Nobody right now is PFAS free.
Okay.
So it's interesting. I was just at a Chiefs conference last week, and there are a number of companies out there right now that say they are PFAS free. They are not third-party checked. So amongst the fire chiefs throughout the country, we've decided until you get another stamp from UL or someone else on there that says you're PFAS free, you're not PFAS free. So I've had a number of people approach me, I'm glad you brought this up, about, hey, well, why don't you buy this? Why don't you buy that? Because right now we have perfect gear that we're wearing that has PFAS in it. We are completely aware of that. Everyone's aware of that. But to go now and get rid of all that gear, I mean, to buy new gear for the entire department is probably close to $800,000. 2.5 years ago now, we bought all new for the gear for the entire department. It was $600,000, but the prices go up exponentially every year. So it is not PFAS free. We are hoping something PFAS free will come out. I think at that point, because of the push with PFAS, I would hope that the feds will play a major role in helping that to get that to the firefighters throughout the country.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor. Anyone else? Okay, a motion has been properly made in second. All those in favor of the motion as amended? All those opposed? It carries. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Numero 7.
Item 7, resolve, whereas the City Council has responsibility for approving annual appropriations for the operation of city departments as submitted by the mayor, and whereas the appropriations for the Brockton Public Schools are the largest amounts to be reviewed, and whereas for the current fiscal year 2024, the following amounts were approved. Net school spending, $219,868,010. Non-net school spending, $11,245,147, or more than $230 million. And whereas it is critically important that the city provides sufficient funding for classroom teachers, educational programs, and related services for our students at all grade levels. Now therefore be it resolved that the mayor and the chief financial officer be invited to a meeting of the council to discuss the feasibility of an independent objective review of the entire administrative structure of the Brockton Public Schools. Provided further, if funding is approved for this study, the data generated would provide the City Council with valuable information when annual budget reviews for school appropriations are conducted in June 2024. Invited Mayor Robert Sullivan, Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer, TJ Plant, Open Architects Consultant.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Just to let you know, Mr. Plant had informed the clerk he was unable to join us tonight. TJ Plant works for Open Architects. Open Architects was engaged by DESE, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, relative to the school deficit. He was charged, his company was charged to look at FY24, 25, 26. They have met that standard. DESE, as of last Thursday, is no longer utilizing Open Architects services. They've met what they needed to do relative to that. I just wanted to let you know. With that being said, what I want to talk about tonight, and I'm excited about Councilor Fowle putting this forward, the view would be Open Architects, again, was paid 100% by DESE, but I do think that we need to continue the services of Open Architects, and I think the intent of this resolve could potentially be met with what TJ and his team are doing, but thank you, Councilor.
I have Councilor Falwell, who actually was the author of the resolve.
Councilors and gentlemen, Mr. Mayor, the Brockton Public Schools is a multi-dimensional department that spends $230 million of taxpayer money, and it's my philosophy that the bottom line is classroom services, classroom teachers. Going back to the 1980s when I served on the school committee, they tinkered around the edges of changing some positions and moving some administrative assistants around. Dan Kulick, Henry Hobaker, Harry Allen, names that no one here, because everyone is too young, will remember. But I don't believe we have ever, as a community, taken a look at this school department structure and asked ourselves, what should it look like? Where are we spending so much money, and are we getting a return on that investment? I'm convinced, after looking at, and I certainly am not an expert, I'm convinced that there are many, many facets within the school department where we can save considerable money. But again, I think having an independent, objective look at that is the only way to go, because that lends credibility. It kind of depoliticizes comments that we all may make or that the school committee may make, and it gives us a broad picture of what should the schools look like in the year 2023, 2024, 2025 going forward. Now, Mr. Mayor, what I would assume we would do, but if this is passed, we do an RFP subject to funding, and we'd find out what would it cost to have someone come in and do it. I have no idea. I mean, I'm not suggesting that we blow a lot of money on this, but as we sit here during the budget, we get a budget book and we have people come in, and let's face it, we do not know with any specificity what really are the needs of the school system. We don't really know if the administrative structure of the school system is what we would want for our children, for the teaching staff, for the other staff that labor away every day trying to do the best they can. And I just think it's time to, to use the old trite expression, call a timeout and say, look, it isn't what we know, it's what we don't know. And what we don't know is, where are we blowing money? Where do we have what I consider to be bloat, administrative bloat, too many positions where either those positions could be allocated somewhere else, or we could eliminate those positions and channel more funds to classroom services and classroom teachers. The report that DESE did in 2020, which came out in the fall, they had a site visit in March of 2020. It's a long report. It's over 100 pages. I would certainly hope the school committee and all interested counselors would read that. I can forward it to you. It's on the website. And it talks about aligning your administrative structure and your spending and your policies with the goals and objectives of your school district. And I just think that is so critical that we do that, because we're not a rich community. The money that we allocate to the schools, every dollar has to be wisely applied to the goals and objectives of giving our students the best possible education. So if this were to be passed by the council, I'm guessing you would get together with
Mike Morris from procurement
and do an RFP, find out what it would cost, because I do think it would be very helpful going forward in the next 3 to 5 years if we finally identify what we want the administrative structure of the Brockton Public Schools to look like, right down to the building level. I understand some schools may have 2 assistant principals. Maybe we don't, maybe we don't need to. But at any rate, this isn't designed to eliminate positions, because I know people have careers, I know people have families, but on the other hand, I think it is our solemn obligation to spend money
in the pursuit of educational excellence in the best possible manner. And absent having some type of an independent objective study, I can't sit here and say that I really fully know what I'm talking about and what I'm voting on. So that's where I'm coming from, colleagues and Mr. Mayor and Mr. Claxon. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Mayor, I was a little confused about what you said about open architects. Did you state that Mr. Plant has completed his obligation?
For DESI, he didn't work for the city or the schools. He worked for DESI. So DESI has determined that the scope of services that they engaged him for, hired his company for, has been met as of the last day of February, which was last Thursday. So he will be coming back to present it, the findings, but that's what we were told. We have been discussing this, and I mentioned it in school committee, that we knew at some point DESI, I mean, they've been great. I thank Commissioner Riley, but at some point they weren't going to fund that entity anymore. But I believe that we should continue to work with open architects, and I know Mr. Clarkson can opine on that as well. We are looking at 4 months left in 24, and we are going to be here in June for 25. I sent an email out. A lot of you saw it. I don't know how it got on Facebook, but I sent out an inter-office last week to my department heads for cost containment measures. There is a hiring freeze unless I approve a hiring, in-state and out-of-state travel. This is on the city side, and also training and conferences, which I've been an advocate for. We need to continue to make sure that, number one, we have the funds to move forward in 25. I remember saying, and it might have been to you, Councilor, I'm very concerned about 25, and I continue to be concerned about that. The DESI folks have been great. They're also paying for a safety school audit for Brockton High. Commissioner Riley, I asked them if they'd expand it district-wide. They didn't say no, so I take that as a positive. But as of last Thursday, which was the 29th, because of leap year, right, that was the date that DESI has told open architects, correct?
So you're saying that a report is going to be generated by Mr. Plant. I know, I mean, I've been following along through the last few months of his presentations before the school committee, and there's still a lot of questions that are kind of out there that it seemed like he was in the middle of trying to get to the bottom of.
He's going to still work on that for us, Councilor. We are going to engage his services. It's going to be a monthly type of contract. Law has looked at it. Mike Morris from procurement has looked at it. But again, he didn't work for us, meaning the city schools, and DESI gave him
a small scope. Okay, so DESI just had a limited scope.
Yes.
But all of these questions that are kind of still on the table.
It's beyond that scope that we need to continue to ask and have him work with us on.
Okay, and so we'll put an RFP out, or can we engage with him directly, or?
You've been dealing with Mike on that. It's a direct.
So we did anticipate that at some point their work with DESI would conclude and we would need to. So we actually several weeks ago began the process so that open architects' work would be seamless.
Okay.
And they are on some sort of state bid list that, according to the procurement office, the school department, not the city, can directly contract with them. So that's what we're supporting them, but we're working on executing a contract directly without a bid process, which is allowed by law, so that their work can continue. And that start date we anticipate will be March 1, so that there'll be no break in service.
So we're past March 1. Is he back on the job or no?
They're still wrapping up their work for DESI, okay. So we had a meeting today just to talk about that report. So they'll continue to do some work under that contract that concluded, but we do anticipate that they will, that they'll start right away and support the schools and thereby support the city.
Okay, great, because just as I stated, following along with his presentations, he's brought a lot to light about, you know, kind of how we got into this mess and what the current, you know, it being Munis or some of the grants or the accounts, that's 199 account and all the confusion that's kind of wrapped up in that. And so I was really looking forward to speaking with Mr. Plant today to kind of try to get to the bottom of some of that. And really what it was is, you know, the expectation that he would have some, you know, some policy or, some policy implementations that we could put into effect that would help kind of resolve a lot of the issues that we find ourselves in. And just, the fact that I was a little surprised about the scope and him not being on the job. But, I mean, our school committee definitely, and our school department needs some direction on those issues. And so it's good to hear that he'll be back on the job to provide that information because, I think it's greatly needed. So I look forward to hopefully when he's back on the job to bring him before the council to have some more in-depth discussions regarding the school committee issues. So, Mr. Chair, that's all I have. I appreciate it. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you, Councilor Minichiello.
Good evening.
Councilor, good evening.
As I recall, when I was on the last years of being on the school committee, when that report came out from DESE, we, as a community, had been experiencing major, obviously, financial issues at the time, and we were trying as a committee to provide the students with a well-rounded education. We wanted to provide services with respect to programs that incentivized kids to come to school, because that was one of our problems, making sure kids are coming to school. And we want to basically have enough carrots so that they would choose to come, especially at the high school level, because there was a significant number of students that were dropping out. And I recall that report where DESE was commenting and saying that the school committee was using sort of a gut approach in terms of not analyzing the data. Our philosophy at the time was basically to try and have less chiefs and more Indians on the ground, have less administration, bloated administration. But the comments from DESE were that we were going from our gut, and we weren't utilizing the data, and they felt we needed more supervisors to basically monitor and make sure that what was being implemented in the schools by the teachers was quality programming, quality delivery, quality best methods, best technology, best materials. So it was a very interesting time, because again, we were trying to deliver to the kids the well-rounded education at the same time. Jesse was on basically criticizing us because we didn't want to invest in the middle management, so to speak. So there may be some resources with MASS and DESE that could basically give us some free analysis, review. I mean, they've got Mr. Plant in there, so obviously there's going to be a report to DESE in terms of what the current state of affairs is in the Brockton Public Schools. So before we spend a ton of money to try and get our own professional, we should see what this report says and what DESE is saying, is going on, and how they feel the next step should be. Because it's just basically to run down the rabbit hole again and implement things that aren't going to be effective is going to be a waste of all of our funds. We have a special population of students. We have kids that are coming many from Cape Verde, many from Haiti still. We really have to analyze where these kids are coming from, because the ESL population in Brockton is different from the ESL population in Quincy or in Lowell, or in Lawrence. I mean, so we have to basically get a focus on where our kids are coming from and what they need. Their needs are going to be different from another city, who has kids from, populations that aren't going to be applicable to our materials. So there are, in fact, some specified and specific materials that can apply to our populations, and that's really what we need to focus on. Understand who our students are, understand where they're coming from, understand what materials are best suited for this group of kids. Because, again, many of the kids like in Newton are coming from Russia or coming from Eastern Europe. And those kids are well-versed in mathematics, just because that's what they focus on over there, mathematics. Our kids are coming from, I would say, South America, Latin communities. So there needs to be a focus on our specific needs and our student body. So just a generic plan isn't going to work. It's got to be specified for our population, for our students. And to do that, we really need to focus on the data that DESE is going to provide us with, and also perhaps some STAR data on our specific populations. Delivery and materials is going to be huge, and a balance with respect to the carrot to get these kids to come to school, to want to come to school, especially the older kids. The monies that we need to provide for that well-rounded education, we can't basically chintz out on these kids, because if we do, what we're going to have is too many kids not graduating, too many kids not being prepared. And this city really used to be known as the #1 urban education experience. We can do that again, but we just need to do what's right, and we need to spend what we need to spend and not spend it foolishly. Spend it so specific, so with such accuracy in terms of what population we have. And we will reap the benefits, I can assure you of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Nicastro, followed by Counselor Rodriguez.
Thank you. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, Councilor.
You mentioned that Urban Architects is in the process of preparing a report, okay, following all these months of review and analysis. And that report will be delivered about when?
I don't know, because, again, we don't engage the services. I can tell you Mr. Plant has told us that he has generated it. He's working with his client at the time, or actually his boss at the time, which was DESE. So I don't have the answer for that. We can inquire again tomorrow to get a status update and let all of you know.
Will the report, I know it was done for DESE, will it be provided to the city of Brockton?
It will be. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And will it be made available to the public?
Yes. In my
Okay, good.
opinion, yes. All of everything should be transparent and open.
Okay, and once that work is completed, when Urban Architects continues working for the city of Brockton, do you have a sense of what it will cost?
Right now, the proposal, and it's, just to clarify, it's Open Architects.
Thanks.
And right now, the proposal that we are considering is a flat fee-based proposal, not an hourly rate, and that fee is approximately $20,000 per month.
Per month. Okay, will you be coming to us to appropriate for it?
No, because, as I mentioned, because of the procurement laws, that contract will actually be between the Brockton Public Schools and Open Architects. The cost for that contract in the current construct of figuring out the numbers and how to get to June 30th of fiscal year '24 with a positive balance, their fee has been considered as part of that, our overall obligations.
Okay. And on the topic of our resolve, which is a feasibility study, I think it's a great idea. I think it's necessary. I hope that you will, or it will, and I'm happy to meet with anyone to discuss parameters, include transportation, the transportation costs, and the costs that are resulting in the deficiencies over the last couple of years in their budget. Because we need to know, was the best decision made in acquiring a fleet of buses and running a transportation division, and what can be done in the alternative?
So tomorrow night at the school committee, I will be giving my regular update to them, and I do plan on addressing that very specific issue. and not to provide a premature update that I will provide to the school committee, but my sentiments that I will express will very much be in alignment, Counselor, with what you just said.
Yeah, that's good. Now, speaking about spending at the public schools, we mentioned earlier that a message that Mayor Sullivan sent out to department heads somehow managed to end up on social media. And it deals with, spending freezes and getting everything reviewed and beforehand. Is that similarly happening in the Brockton Public Schools? Because, of course, rumors are rampant, but I understand their spending has not changed at all, and that they are, again, running a deficit. Who is watching over this, and who will put controls on this, hopefully before the end of this fiscal year?
So again, I do intend to address some of those specific issues in my suggestions and report to the school committee tomorrow night. I think since the city has deepened its collaboration with and oversight of the schools, there have been some systems that we have put in place, including position control, to try to curb some of those costs. But I do agree wholeheartedly that further cost containment is needed in order for them to finish fiscal year 24 without a significant deficit. The transportation is a huge part of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Rodriguez, followed by Counselor Azak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know which one of you gentlemen will answer this question, but something that's been bugging me since August when the deficits were announced. FY23, we budgeted $206 million, and they overshot that by $14 to $20 million. So that would make it anywhere between 220 to 225 million, somewhere around there. Now, we budgeted in total for FY24 over $230 million. And yet we laid off a bunch of teachers that were not laid off the previous years. So, in classroom support. So my question to you both is, what happened? I mean, if they had 225 or so, no one got laid off, even with the deficit. Now we've got 230 plus. We're laying off a bunch of teachers and classroom support. So what exactly happened?
Well, again, I think that's what the investigation is going to find out. I mean, it's an ongoing investigation. I've asked everybody that is applicable to participate. I've participated. I'll continue to participate. It's transparent, it's fair, it's impartial, and I've made this pledge. When the findings come out on that, that's getting published to the general public as well. And also recall, there is and again, that's not with me, that's being run in conjunction with the city solicitor with an external law firm. But there's also an audit. So I don't have the answer on that, Mr. President. We will get an answer, and everybody will know. So at this time, I don't know. I don't know, but we'll find out.
Because when you look at it, you have an additional $15 million plus on top of the previous FY, and yet we laid off teachers, and yet everybody's running around saying that the sky's falling and all that other stuff, when we have a lot more money provided to the schools than we've ever done before. And yet, the previous years, no one got laid off. And this year, we laid off a bunch of people, and yet we're basically contemplating another deficit at the end of the fiscal year, when technically we should have a lot less expenses because we laid off a bunch of people from the previous FY. So this is what somehow it's kind of mind-boggling in the sense that I can understand it. We blew it by let's say 20 million the previous year, and yet we increased the budget this year, that it should be pretty much safe based on minus the staff that we laid off from the previous FY. But yet somehow it's like we're hearing something totally on the opposite side, that we're going to be we're going to have another deficit this year. I don't quite understand that, to be honest with you. Mr. Moneyman.
Well, I think the mayor explained procedurally what's happening to answer that question. I can tell you in broad terms. First of all, when Open Architects produces their report, I think they will show very plainly the numbers behind the numbers and how that happened. But there are two main cost drivers. They're not the only ones, but there are two main cost drivers to the fiscal challenges of the school department, and they are transportation, which is a responsibility financially of the city. That's our non-net school spending line. And so those costs are borne entirely by the city. So any additions, any cost pressures against that, the limit of that budget, are borne by the city, which is why the current state of affairs in transportation is such a challenge. Because even if we balance the school budget, we have to deal with those transportation costs and those pressures. So those costs really need to be brought under control. And the other, not the only driver, but a main cost pressure are special education costs. And the Commonwealth does provide several different funds and sources of funds to mitigate some of those costs, but they are significant drivers of the overall budget for the school department, and they're unpredictable, and there's no scientific formula to determine what those special education costs are going to be, because it's based on the number of students and what their specific needs are. So those have to be dealt with on an individual basis every year, and this year, as well as last year, they're causing significant pressures on the budget. There are other things that and some of which I'll talk about tomorrow night at the school committee. But those are the main reasons why we continue to have pressures against the total appropriated amount.
Yeah, Mr. Clarkson, I can understand, for instance, if we overspent by $20 million last year, the FY23, and if we had budgeted, 220, 225, I can understand us saying, you know what? No, if we had budgeted 206 again, I can understand us saying we're going to have a deficit again because the previous year we spent 220. But we budgeted over 230 million. Over 230 million, and yet we're facing a deficit when in reality it's a lot higher than what you had for transportation the previous years, when we had for special ed the previous years. And that's the thing that I cannot grasp. I cannot put my fingers around, to be honest with you. That continues to concern a lot of us in the city and in this body as well, that if you were at 220, yeah, overspent. But you were at 235, 230. How can you be overspending if you did it pretty much well with 220, 225 the previous year? And my next question is, who's watching the book or the books now over at the school department?
So I'll answer the last question first. In the absence of the school CFO and the deputy CFO who are still on leave, the superintendent has brought in an interim school business manager who is an experienced school business professional.
And answers to whom?
She answers to the superintendent. But based at the request of both the mayor and the superintendent, as all of you know, I have been working very closely with the superintendent and with that employee. Let me just finish my thought previously. She's an experienced school business manager who actually worked in that profession and recently retired, so she brings with her a wealth of experience. And so I work closely with her. I work closely with the superintendent. There are some employees. The staff has been significantly reduced over there, but there are some employees. My staff, actually in my office, support some of their efforts because they're short-staffed and because they really need to have more of a sense of organization and have some formal workflows, as Councilor Thompson talked about before. Our city auditor also is involved because at the end of the day, the city auditor pays the bills, approves the bills to be paid, and maintains the records in Munis.
But, so, you have how many people in your staff?
5.
In your staff, to oversee the entire city budget?
Correct.
And how many people are in the finance department at the schools?
Right now, less than that.
Less than 5?
Yes.
There used to be 20-something.
Well, this gets actually to the heart of Councilor Farwell's resolve in terms of the actual administrative structure. I don't want to author the study because I'm not the consultant, but one of the things that we've discovered in taking a greater role is that the administrative structure is somewhat fractured. That, for instance, there wasn't and isn't a clear workflow between human resources and finance and payroll, so that when someone gets hired, there's a coordinated effort to formalize that process. So when you ask how many staff are in the finance office, I'm not including payroll or accounts payable or accounts receivable, because from my estimation, there isn't a cohesive group like there is here in City Hall. So right now, just working day to day on the budget, there's the school business manager, there's a couple of accountants, both of whom used to work over here, and some support staff. So the staff has been significantly reduced.
Mr. Clarkson, I thought that you actually were going to be the overseer of the finances in the school department, because they have proven that they can't do this on their own. So I think a great deal, I can understand, because, that the whole issue with DESI being involved and paying for this and paying for that. But we still have the same issues that we had in August or even in July, because not much, as Councilor Nicastro said, we haven't done much to change the structure. We haven't done much to say, hey, we reduced this budget line item from $5 million to $3 million, so we know there's a $2 million saving. We haven't done any of that. I think my grandson, who's 8 years old, can come back and tell you that if you don't do anything to change that, when August of this year comes around, we're going to be talking about the same thing.
Yeah, and your grandson will probably also be able to tell us all what Albert Einstein said, and that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. So you have my 100% agreement on that. But I think some of the things that Councilor Farwell talks about in this resolve, and that we've talked about separately, is there needs to be an administrative overhaul, because the lack of clarity about the administrative chain of command is real, and it needs to be addressed. And so, yes, Chapter 324 vests me with responsibilities, oversight, education reform, which came after Chapter 324, vests significant authority in the superintendent. We need to reconcile those differences and really come up with a clear administrative structure and that would address some of those issues. And I think some of the stuff that Councilor Farwell is working on would do that. The superintendent of schools does not report to me, no matter what administrative structure we talk about. So, and the school committee is separately elected by the people. So there's a whole host of administrative issues involved in this conundrum that need to be resolved. There are not easy answers, but you have my complete and total agreement and support that it's of grave concern and it needs to be addressed.
We are now in March, and this whole thing happened in the beginning of August of last year. And we're now in March, and there's no light at the end of this tunnel. All these changes need to be made. We actually had talked about proposing a joint committee between the city council, the school, and some of the folks in the city to look realistically at some of these positions that need to be eliminated. But I know that the school committee is having their issues in terms of, who's in, who's out, and all the other stuff. But my thing is, this is insanity, to be honest with you, because we're running into, now there's 4 months left before we hit that same curb that we hit last year. And what makes you think, or any of us think, that we're not going to have this problem? And I understand that the school committee has, and the schools have some autonomy to work, but a few months ago, we were standing here basically breaking the little piggy bank that we had to bail out the schools. And I'm afraid that we're going to have to do this again, come this summer. And that's the fear factor that I have, that we're not doing anything to change anything from what was done last year to this year.
I can assure you, Council, that we won't, because we don't have any money left. right? We drained the piggy bank to address the issues from last year. And if you're frustrated, let me promise you that I can match and exceed the profundity of your frustration by leaps and bounds, because I live it every day. And this is of grave concern, and I will encourage you to watch the school committee tomorrow night, because I intend to speak very frankly about my own frustrations, and I think the need to take action and not have discussions about what needs to be done.
And my last question to you, do you know that whether or not some of these department heads that we had heard that had no idea what their budgets were, contrary to what happens in the city, on the city side of things, do you know if any of them actually have gotten some sort of a hold on their budget so that they know exactly what they're supposed to spend or not supposed to spend? Or they're still sending the bill as they used to do for somebody to pay?
Well, so there are not any formal budgets for some of those departments because they haven't been created by the school committee. But I can tell you with certainty for fiscal year 25, which is something that the school finance team, with my support and the help of Open Architects, is working on, that we expect you'll have a school committee budget that very much looks like the city budget. And I would encourage all of you to check your emails when you get home tonight, because in your email inboxes is an up-to-date, as of today, an up-to-date budget update on each and every city department, including the enterprise funds, that shows you as of today how much they have spent. And so that is our goal, is to bring that level of accountability and accuracy to the school reporting.
But it has to be done sooner than later. We're running out of months.
Counselor, I don't know how many times I can say I agree with you, but I agree with you.
All right, well, thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Azak, followed by Counselor Griffin.
Thank you. Good evening. So I'm not going to repeat everything my colleagues said, but I'm just concerned because when you first introduced or spoke about Desi and the TJ plant coming in, I was under the impression of obviously Desi's paying for him and everything. So before we've even heard his report, before he's even presented to the school committee, I'm hearing that we're going to hire him after he's completed the job for Desi. So what did Desi actually send him to Brockton to find out?
So he was charged by his boss, which was Desi, to look at FY24 forecast and look at 25 forecast and look at 26. Again, the city and schools was not his employer, but that's what they were charged to look at. I would also suggest that they've looked at more than that. If you followed, I know you have, Counselor, followed some of the school committee meetings, they've really done a deep dive. Ultimately, whatever their report, whatever they're finding that Desi comes back with, we're going to share it. That's another piece of the puzzle that's going to help us along with the investigation, again, which I've told you will be made public, and then the audit, which RSM is doing right now. It's ongoing. Attorney Spotiford, who is one of the attorneys for the schools, is the point person on that endeavor.
Okay, so once again, my concern is we're looking to continue to hire him before we've even received the results. That's one of my biggest concerns, is I feel like studies are great. We've done, even with this resolve before us, I think we're at the point where we really just need to put the brakes on and not spend another dime until we get our eggs in a row. Like, we need to have a plan, we need to hear facts, and really, with all respect to our CFO and the finance department on the school side, our auditor on city side, school side, we have a lot of people that are on the city's payroll, and I think to just add another company on there, yeah, $20,000 a month, it's not a lot of money, and if we're talking millions of dollars, but in a city with we're trying to figure out our deficit, I think we really have to be careful.
And I served with you and I respect you. What I will tell you is Mr. Plant was able to help the city of Springfield. A lot of you have heard receivership, control board. The word that was mentioned recently was bankruptcy. We cannot, as elected officials, we all take the same oath, we cannot let the city of Brockton go bankrupt. So whatever we can do to make sure that we are solvent, we are moving forward on the city and school side. The non-net trickles over to the city side. So there is some dire situations right now. The fact that he was able to help the city of Springfield really, I think, speaks volumes. He is going to be speaking to us again, us meaning school committee, on Thursday. We have a meeting on Thursday. It's called the retreat. But again, I concur that $20,000, it is a lot of money. It is. But we need to make sure that we right the ship because it's sinking right now. I expect in short order, I'll be going in to see the governor, lieutenant governor, and the team. Tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock, I'll be meeting with the Secretary of Education at Brockton High. So it's all hands on deck right now. It's all collaboration. But at the end of the day, there are ongoing investigations that are going to give us some real substantive truth and facts and what was broken and what we need to make sure never happens again, Councilor.
No, and I agree with you. And once again, do we have a plan of what we want him to do? I mean, I follow the school committee meetings. I've heard Mr. Plant. I mean, I know the situation we're in, but what are we getting for our $20,000 a month from, what are we expecting to get?
So first to clarify, Councilor, we are not hiring, we're not engaging. This is a contract, as I mentioned, between the Brockton Public Schools and
Yes, I
Open
understand,
Architects.
Mr. Claxton, but Brockton Public Schools is part of.
And I get that, it's all the city, but I want to be clear for the folks watching at home and set clear expectations that the city's funds are not being spent for this contract. Yes, it's all public money, and I get that, but there is a distinction between the city budget and the school budget, so I want to offer that as clarification so that we're clear that the council and the city administration, other than providing review and being helpful in engaging the contract, doesn't have a role. But what we're getting for that is, if you look at the city side budget, the budget that you look at in that budget book that you'll receive in a couple of months, and the level of detail that's in that budget, that level of the detail does not exist in the school budget. The budget that the school committee actually voted last year was 4 lines. There was a budget book that was handed out, but what's in the accounting software in Munis bears no resemblance or relation to that budget book. So the most important thing that Open Architects will be doing will be working closely with Trish Boyer, the school business administrator, the superintendent, the school committee, and me to actually construct a budget that is reflective of an updated chart of accounts that can actually be tracked. And on any given day, if any of you say to me, how much has the school department spent as of today, we'll be able to tell you, like we're able to do. That is vitally important, and one of the main failings that we saw was that lack of accountability. And so Open Architects will be bringing that skill set and that support to help us construct a budget. And it's not just Mr. Plant alone. Open Architects has a team of financial professionals. So it's not just one person for that monthly fee. It's their whole staff, including grant specialists and financial analysts that will be able to assist the city in that. In addition to that, constructing the FY25 budget, they'll also be available to be able to identify and capture all of the funding resources. And finally, well, not finally, but probably the third priority will be bringing some order to the way that the school department handles grants. There have been some pretty significant deficiencies in how the grants have been accounted for and overseen, and that requires significant administrative work and support to bring those in line. So there is definitely a defined scope of work. I can provide, the contract has not been executed, but the scope of work is public because it's been conveyed via email. So I'm happy to provide that to you so you know exactly what they will deal with.
Thank you. I think that would be great, Mr. Clarkson, because, I mean, this sounds great. It sounds like we're getting ourselves together and they're going to help us get through this, but I just want to make sure that it's followed through and that, you know, they, even though it's a company, it's not just one person, it's not just Mr. Plant, but we want to make sure that we're following through with what they're going to provide us. Like I said, I don't want to see us I want to see us come out of this, and I believe everybody here we're all on the same page, but I just, I feel we need to we need to start somewhere, and this has to be it. I mean, we can't just keep moving without getting results. So I want to see results, and I hope, I put my faith in you. I mean, even though we watch the school committee, we follow what's happening. I mean, we're not, as you just stated, pretty much, the decisions are up to them. So I want to make sure that, this company's answering to answering to you or whoever it is that is going to oversee them, whether it's the superintendent, whoever are they going to answer to you, Mr. Clarkson, superintendent, school committee? I mean, who's going to follow up to make sure that what you just stated is going to get done?
Well, ultimately, they will be responsible to the superintendent, but most certainly I will be engaging on a daily basis to hold the contractor accountable.
Okay, and I think that that would be great, because I think we need to back each other up, whether it's the superintendent needs backing or whatever it is, because we can't fail at this. I think we're taking a big step. I mean, I think that was it. You said you're going to present their findings I'll be watching tomorrow evening, and you said you'll supply us with the email of their report?
Yeah, I don't anticipate that Open Architects will be providing their findings to the school committee tomorrow night. They need to provide their final report to the Commonwealth first, which they have not yet done. And when they do that, then they will provide it to us. My plan, as the CFO, I make a regular report now to the school committee, and I will be reporting on, I guess, my findings of what I think needs to be done immediately in several areas to contain costs and to rein in the *24 budget.
Okay. And lastly, I know, Mayor, you mentioned that you sent out an email about a hiring freeze. I didn't hear anything about, so where was that posted on social media?
It wouldn't have gone to you. It went to my department heads. I had a department head meeting. I have a department head meeting every other Wednesday at 9. We discussed it on Wednesday. I told them what we did. I did a follow-up email. I included Dr. Jim Cobbs. He doesn't work for me. He does not. But I wanted him, since he was in the meeting, to be aware of it as well. I'll tell you how I'm taking this serious. I canceled the Boston Globe and Boston Herald print edition today on the city side. Every single penny is going to count, and we need to take it serious on both sides, and we will. But again, with 4 months to go, what the council president and former mayor said is true. So, I'm hopeful that we will continue to move forward in a positive, beneficial manner, both on schools and city side. That's what we serve. That's what the constituents, taxpayers, and the students and staff at BPS deserve.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councilor.
Thank you, Mr. CFO. Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam Councilor. We have Councilor Griffin, Duranencourt, and then we got a second round for a couple other folks.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, Mr. Clarkson, Mr. Mayor. I just have a couple questions. First to Mr. Clarkson. How many people have actually been reduced in the central office as far as layoffs go? How many people have been removed from their positions?
In the central office?
Yes, sir.
Well, as you know, there are 3 employees who are on leave, but they remain employees. There are people who have left whose positions have not been filled, but I don't believe that any positions in the central office have been eliminated. But that's one of the things I think that we really need to look very seriously at, is what the administrative structure is, what it should be, and whether or not it can be leaner.
I agree 100%. I mean, there's 5 people in the personnel office, executive director and 4 subordinate associate directors, assistant directors. The title escapes me. That seems awful top-heavy. And on top of that, they can't put teachers in the classroom. So I don't know why you have a human resource department of that magnitude and they can't come out and recruit teachers. That's one problem. The second thing I see is, I understand the transportation, special ed, those are costs that kind of drive themselves, and that's something we're going to have to deal with in perpetuity. But as far as the contracts go, there's quite a few contracts over there that no one really has a handle on what grant this is coming from, what funding sources is coming from. Has that been addressed at all by the administrators over there?
So one of the things you'll hear me talk about tomorrow night is that very issue, Counselor, that the manner in which employees are engaged, while legal and appropriate, is rare. That the number of employees that are employed by what we call one-on-one contracts, what we have on the city side with the police chief and the fire chief. There are over 100 of those in the school department. And so that's an area where you'll hear me tomorrow night address that I think the school department needs to take a very different approach. And I can tell you, having worked and managed other communities, generally, those types of employees are what we call employees at will, or employees that come and get paid and in most cases do a very good job and are very well compensated, but don't have the security and benefits of an individual contract that goes beyond a simple paycheck and enumerates pretty significant benefits. And so that's an area where I think there's some pretty significant analysis needs to be done.
There's a follow-up in that. Are they the 1180 contracts, mostly retirees who are brought back and can work 1,180 hours a year? Are these the type of contracts we're referring to?
No. There may be some of those employees. I don't want to say that there aren't any, but to explain what Councilor Griffin's talking about, municipal retirees can actually come back and work, not just here, but anywhere in the Commonwealth, but they're limited to the amount that they can work, and it's relative to their pension. And it used to be $960, and now it's $1180. That's the number of hours you can work per year and still receive your pension. So these are, for the most part, regular employees who are pre-retirement, but are engaged in a way that they have an individual contract.
So they are receiving their normal salary, their regular jobs, and they have a side contract for a second paycheck?
No. It's just that the contracts, a normal employee would, their benefits would be described in the bylaws if it were a town, ordinances if it were a city, or some other vehicle. So these aren't folks who are receiving two different paychecks, but that are receiving benefits that are described in their contracts that are generally more robust than the benefits that are offered through the ordinances on the city side. Vacation buyback, educational incentives, those sorts of things.
With your background, do you see some significant cuts at the administrative building to be necessary?
I think there's going to have to be belt tightening everywhere in order for us to have a balanced 25 budget, yes.
There also seems to be a lot of duplicity with city services, because there is some interaction, again, getting back to the personnel department. I'm under the impression that some of the personnel work is actually done by the city side, also on top of the 5 administrators that are over at the school side. Am I correct?
Yeah, that is correct. So the benefits, health insurance, as you well know, we actually have a self-insured health insurance program that's managed through my office and the Human Resource Office, and so we oversee the benefits for all employees of the city, including those of the school department. So that support is provided by the folks here in the city.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Mr. Clarkson. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Duranicourt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Mayor, Mr. Clarkson, I have a few questions for you. In terms of, in the spirit of all the mess that we have been dealing with in regard to transportation, my first question to both of you is that what control have been put in place to somewhat determine how how much money we are spending during this fiscal year.
So one of the things that Open Architects has done to support us is provide projections on what those costs are. So for the transportation, and again, I will speak to this in some detail tomorrow night, but we'll call them the yellow school buses, are run by the school department. And so a couple of years ago, there was a decision made, and it was a decision that was made and supported by this body, by the mayor, by me, by the school committee, by the superintendent, to bring that operation in-house in the hopes of saving money. So the city operates through the school department the yellow school buses. The cost savings for that operation were not what was expected, and so that's causing some significant pressure on the non-net school spending. In addition to that, the transportation department over at the schools operates individual contracts for special needs, and so minivans, and there are more than 100 contractors that provide support to the school department with those minivans. And those costs are very significant. And one of the immediate steps that I will recommend tomorrow night is that the school department change the way they execute those contracts, because the contracts are open-ended, they don't have specific fees, and so they lend themselves to costs that are out of control.
Okay, good. Earlier you stated that, let me see you stated that, the transportation costs, and I quote, are not part of the city. No, you said the transportation costs are part of the city, not the school. What do you mean by that?
So when you appropriate, as you'll remember from your previous time as a counselor, you appropriate money for education for the Brockton Public Schools in two tranches. One is the net school spending, so that's the direct educationally related spending. And then you also appropriate a number for non-net school spending. Mm-hmm. That non-net school spending is for transportation. So that's a separately appropriated number. The state requires us to spend a specific amount every year on education, and that's calculated, and we have to meet that state required number. The non-net number is separate from that, and all of those costs are borne by the city.
Okay, so Mr. Clarkson, if I may, who approves transportation contract for the school?
There is a transportation department within the school department that executes those contracts. In a perfect world, the schools would have and used to have a person who oversees procurement. That person left and was not replaced. So I think that is a shortfall, a gap in the process right now. Ultimately, the responsibility of those contracts rests with the superintendent, but the process itself is, again, something that I will talk about tomorrow night, because it's a process that could and should be improved.
So, Mr. Clarkson, you stated that there is a transportation department, which I'm assuming that would be in charge to approve those contracts, but you also stated that the superintendent is the one approve it. What does that supposed to mean? I'm confused.
Well, I'm sorry for that, but it's similar to that same dynamic here in City Hall, that the DPW, oh, he left, but the DPW could execute a contract for cleaning catch basins. And that could be executed within the Department of Public Works. But ultimately, the responsibility for that contract rests with the CEO, which is the mayor. So here in the city side, we've instituted a process so that those contracts have accountability. And whenever a contract exceeding $10,000, because that's a procurement threshold in the Uniform Procurement Act, whenever a contract exceeds $10,000, it gets routed through city offices, including my office, including the law office, and has to go through all those levels of scrutiny before it's executed by the CEO, by the mayor.
Yeah, I mean, let me just go back to what I asked you. You know, I mean, obviously, you know, and I know the situation that we are dealing with in regard to transportation. I mean, this is one of the departments that is costing the city of Brockton a lot of money. I mean, I understand that we have to, you know, transport our kids, making sure that, you know, they go to school on time. But what I do not understand, and Mr. Mayor, I think that goes to you as well. What I do not understand is that, you know, even though we have a transportation department, but the person who has the power to approve those contracts are the superintendent. Mr. Mayor, and as the chairman of the school committee, don't you think this is troublesome in regard to giving that power to one person?
Well, that's the way it works. I mean, in essence, the superintendent is the quasi-mayor on the school side. On the city side, the mayor is the CEO by charter, but there's a lot of power on the school side, which is promulgated under the auspices of the superintendent of schools. And that's not unique to Brockton. That's throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Council.
Yeah, I understand that, but Mr. Mayor, like, but what's the point of having a transportation department when those contracts are being approved by one person? What's the point of that department? I'm assuming we are paying those people to, you know, take a look at those contracts and making sure that these people, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that the school department does not have a procurement department, right? Is that right?
They had a gentleman, I don't remember his name, he retired.
I mean, I know the city has one, obviously.
Correct, Mike Morris, that's right.
Does the school have something like this?
They had one that acted in that capacity, and he retired, and it has not been filled as of yet. The transportation department, Counselor, is on the school side.
Yeah. So, obviously, this person who was supposed to take a look at those contracts and making sure that the folks who are giving the contract to are doing their job is not there due to retirement. And obviously, I mean, we're talking about transportation where people are making a lot of money. And this is one of my, you know, biggest concern coming up, you know, this budget time in regard to when the school department comes here and, you know, ask for money in regard to the budget. I mean, I'm assuming I'm going to have a lot of questions for them. But what I do not understand, Mr. Mayor, you know, is the fact that we are dealing with so many problems. I mean, I think you have an opportunity to do something that has never done before in regard to these situations.
I hope so.
I'm assuming that, you know, we shouldn't give that power to one person. I mean, especially when we do not even have somebody, you know, let me just put it to you simple like this. I mean, how do we know these people are doing what they're supposed to do in terms of how do we know, you know, how many hours they are working for us? How do we know, you know, how much money? I mean, although, you know, I understand that the city auditor, this is my understanding, does not have access to those contracts. I mean, based on what I read. But how do we know these people are doing what they're supposed to do? I mean, given the situation that we are dealing with. And of course, this is a department that is taking so much of our budget. I mean, that's a lot of money we are talking about right now. And I think it's unfair to our taxpayer whereby we do not have, you know, a group of people looking at those. And transportation has been, you know, since we bought that transportation company, it has been eating money, to put it bluntly.
Yeah, I mean, all I can say this, Counselor, is the investigation, I don't want to compromise the integrity of the investigation. The investigation's ongoing. They're looking at everything, is my understanding. As mayor and as chair, I've stepped away, and it's the right thing to do. I can also tell you that, again, the superintendent is hired by the school committee, but the superintendent, whoever he or she is, has broad authority, the day-to-day operations on the school side. But again, I would expect that the investigation will reap some tangible benefits. And again, when those findings are made, I'll make them public.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. But I mean, Mr. Clarkson, given the situation that we are dealing with, and obviously when you came here, I was watching it online, asking this body, with Council Griffin and myself, we were not here at that time, for that $14-something million, to bail this school out. I thought you were going to have some kind of authority in terms of, how the Brockton Public School is spending our taxpayer money. But based on your statement, it seems like, you do not have any access to anything. You have access to whatever they give you. In terms of, this transportation department, given the fact that it was you, and of course, Mr. Mayor, who came in front of the council asking this body to give you guys the money to bail the school out, without going into receivership. And now, based on your statement, it seems like you have no idea what's going on over there.
Well, I would say that is not at all a fair statement, Counselor, or an accurate statement. I have worked tirelessly.
Point of information, please.
Council
Yield for a point of information.
Go ahead.
The Transportation Department isn't the person who approves the contract. They assign buses. They assign routes. If a driver calls in sick, they have to reroute someone to cover that route. If new students come on board into the city, they have to arrange for the pickup of those students. They do payroll. They make sure that the buses are inspected, because all of the buses have to be inspected periodically during the year per state law. The drivers have to have special driver's licenses. They have to track that. So there's like a whole body of information. I don't want you to think they sit there twiddling their thumbs. There's a whole body of information and responsibility that is within that broad general category of Transportation Department, and that, I think, is the only reason I know is I drive a school van myself outside the city. But I just didn't want you to think that they were sitting around with nothing to do, that's all.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you, Councilor Flowell. I don't believe that's what I was referring to, but I appreciate, your statement. Let me just put it to you like this, though. It's like the school department, obviously these people are on leave right now. They have a CFO. They have a deputy CFO, right? So in terms of approving those contracts, they don't get involved in that? Obviously they're not there. Obviously they're not there, right? It's you and the superintendent. So you don't have any access in finding out what's going on with those contracts?
That is not at all what I said, Counselor, and I would like to go back to what you said, that the staff here doesn't have any idea what's going on there. My staff, in addition to overseeing the $500 million operation here on the city side, has taken on, without any additional compensation, the task of overseeing the schools. That personnel form that I talked about, the personnel control, is transacted in my office by a very dedicated member of my staff. Our budget director, who's currently constructing the city's budget, is also involved in assisting the school finance staff and the folks at Open Architects. So we are very intimately involved and knowledgeable about what happens. So I don't want you to mischaracterize that the city is detached from or unaware of what's happening at the schools. That's not at all accurate, with all due respect, Counselor. What the challenge is, and what we've talked about over the months here, and what we will continue to talk about, and what I believe Councilor Farwell is trying to address through some of the work that he's doing to bring some reform initiatives to you, is that the administrative structure is inefficient. And yes, the superintendent has ultimate authority, but from the superintendent down, the administrative structure is fractured in some cases, that there is a lack of coordination between departments, and the workflows are not formalized as they are over here on the city side. So it does create for an inefficiency and sometimes confusion that has led to the lack of administrative control and the lack of accurate record keeping that is part of the contributing factor to these deficits.
Yeah, Mr. Clarkson, what do you mean by lack of administration control? What does that supposed to mean?
what I've been talking about all night, that there is not a well-defined administrative structure and workflow within the school departments, that there is not a formal process of how to pay a bill, how to execute a contract, how to pay a person, and who gets coordinated in that process. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done to bring some formality to some of those processes.
Good. Thank you. Another question for you. When did the business manager start with the city?
The interim business manager?
Yeah.
I don't know her exact date. She's been here for several months now. I don't know the exact date, but we can certainly get that for you.
So who was managing oversight before the business manager started?
Again, the superintendent is ultimately responsible. In the absence of the school CFO and the deputy CFO, there were staff members that were pitching in and helping. I and my staff were pitching in and helping. And so it was really a team effort. But there was not, for some time, one designated person other than the superintendent who was responsible.
So let me just put it to you like this. Right? It's like, based on our conversation tonight, it seems like, based on your statement, obviously, everything that, well, at least for me, that I have been talking to you tonight in regard to the school system has been falling under the superintendent, and nobody else has nothing to do with it. Would that be a correct statement?
No, it would not. It would be an unfair characterization, Counselor, of what I've been saying to you for quite some time now. I think you're not making a distinction between administrative responsibility and day-to-day activities. What I'm trying to impress upon you is that much as the mayor is ultimately responsible for the work of all department heads on the city side, that doesn't mean that the department heads don't do any work. And it's the same at the schools. The superintendent is ultimately responsible for the day-to-day activities of the schools, but there are a whole host of people who work very hard every day to fulfill that mission.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, given the fact that, obviously we have 7 elected school committee members, and obviously you are the chairman, you are elected as the mayor of the city. I believe that we are at a crossroad whereby we have an opportunity to change, I don't want to say change, but to improve a lot of things in the school system. And I hope this body is paying attention to what has been going on over there, because at the end of the day, we cannot keep on doing the same thing over and over again and expect something different. And obviously, Mr. Clarkson, I appreciate the fact that you take the time to, to answer my questions. And although, we did have a CFO and a deputy CFO at the school system, I understand your position in this. But, despite of all that has been going on, I think that we have an opportunity, to make something good out of this mess in terms of looking at what has been going on and how long that has been going on and how do we improve it. Because at the end of the day, we cannot, continue spending money like this without having the proper procedures to determine who is doing what and why we are doing it. Mr. Mayor, I know that you are very passionate about this city. You love this place. You talk about it. This is not the first time you and I are having this conversation, but I hope that when you go back there, you can talk to your colleagues in terms of, what we have been discussing here and how do we improve it, because I am sick and tired of not knowing of what's going on. And I will not sit here this, summertime voting on anything that I do not understand. And I hope my colleague will join me, to do that, because I hope we will not get to a point where we bail out the school system again. I think it's crazy. The idea of the state coming here and take over the city, it's mind-blowing. I don't want to go there. But at the same time, we have to do our due diligence to making sure that our tax money goes to the place where it's supposed to go. It is our responsibility as elected officials. Each of us was elected to do our job. And each of us, I strongly believe, is passionate about what's going on in this city. It's up to each of us to determine how do we want to take it from there. But for me, I'll do my best on this. So, Mr. Mayor.
Council, I want to thank you. 19 of us raised our hand on January 1st. 11 in this chamber, myself, and 7 school committees. 19 of us have to work together. I want to thank Mr. President, who's already opined and made a determination that there'll be a dedicated night, one night to the schools for the budget. So we will continue to work all together. We will continue to share information. And ultimately, again, if any of you are called by the investigators, I would humbly ask you to participate because, again, we need to get to the bottom of it, and we will. So thank you, Councilor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Clarkson.
Councilor Tavares hadn't spoken yet, so go ahead, Councilor. Then it's Thompson, Farwell, and then Minichel.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and CFO. Actually, I am going to ask a couple questions, as my colleague just finished, but that making me totally confused with the kind of everything. Basically, my understanding is you guys come here, request for money, we approve the money, then you guys give away to school, then there you go. Overstart, you guys never supervise the money or even find out what's going on. Then later on, and you guys find out, like, the school is out of money, they're in trouble, kind of like that. Basically, look like when you give money to the school, the school committee or whatever, they're not supposed to what they're supposed to do. My understanding, the principle, write a contract to buy this, do that, without any supervision and overstart, like you guys find out, it's no money. Then come back again and request for more money. I think I'm just a little confused with that. Look like, no one supervision after you guys, we approve the money here. Going to the school, is no one overseeing that?
I believe that I addressed, Councilor, that question in some of the questions that Councilor Darrencourt had, but the city's role, your role, in funding the school department is to provide a lump sum in the city's budget. So that's why, if you look in your budget book, every other department has a very detailed budget in the budget book. And you vote salaries and wages, purchase of services, other services as part of the overall budget for those departments. But when you appropriate money for the school department, you appropriate it in one lump sum. That's not because you don't care about what happens there. It's not because we don't want to know what they do with the money, but that's the law. So you appropriate in one lump sum because the laws of the Commonwealth say that the schools have autonomy, and that's why there's an elected school committee, and that's why there's a superintendent of schools. And so in 1993, I believe it was, the legislature passed what's called education reform, which granted school superintendents very broad authority to spend the money that was appropriated for them. And so I can tell you, being in local government for a very long time, that push-pull of what level of oversight cities and towns should have for money that's appropriated to the schools is one that's been discussed and debated for the 30-plus years since ed reform has been voted. The role of the city council is to appropriate a lump sum to the schools, and we entrust them to spend that money wisely and properly. If they don't, then the question of our role collectively and individually, the mayor, the city council, the CFO, comes under scrutiny, and that's something obviously that a lot of people have discussed and debated and wondered about. But the role of the city council is very clear in appropriating that money.
I understand that, but I'm confused with the school side and not kind of understanding, when do you guys, for example, when you guys provide the money, do you guys get any report back to the money you guys provide or not necessarily?
So in a perfect world, yes. But my understanding is that regular reporting did not occur.
Okay. And then you guys never asked or requested for any?
Well, the question is very broad. Did we ever ask? Yes, of course. I have weekly meetings with the financial department heads, assessing, auditing, treasurer collector, the budget director, all of us meet on generally a weekly basis in a very lengthy meeting with a formal agenda to discuss the financial state of affairs in the city. And a couple years ago, I began inviting the school CFO and then the deputy CFO to those meetings so that that level of collaboration existed. So did we talk about issues? Most certainly. But there's a difference between having those discussions and scrutinizing and overseeing the autonomous budget of the school committee.
Okay, as this has happened, what's going to be for future? It's going to be the same thing, or you have anything in place for supervision? What's going to happen now from future?
Well, I think, as I've mentioned a few times tonight, Council Farwell is doing some work that I assume will be brought to the City Council in fairly short order, where there are some discussions about formalizing that relationship and maybe taking a look at formalizing the oversight, maybe merging I don't want to put any words in Councilor Farwell's mouth, but we've had some discussions about perhaps merging the finance offices of the school and the city, perhaps merging the human resource offices of the school in the city. I have experience in other communities where I've worked where we've undergone that sort of merger with great success and greater accountability. So clearly the system that we have in place is not working. So clearly we do need to make some changes, and I think this is my personal opinion, that some of those changes should be significantly changing the administrative structure of both the city and the schools so that they are one organization and not two distinct organizations.
Yes. And in the meantime, I believe if you literally a school committee kind of literally work with the school and then oversight, you get the report through the school committee, that would be easy to kind of find out exactly what's going on. Just for example, myself, I have a contract with the government. If I run this business, I go to jail next day, I believe so. I have audit every 6 months. I got to show all the details with the definition of transparency. I got literally 7 people coming to my office, audit me every 6 months. But if I kind of go like this, the way is everything confusing, I'm going to get arrested the same day. I've been audited, literally 6 times with the state, but every time I've been very successful, but the many times, sometimes I'm a little scared, but I'm trying to do everything transparency, and then all the office got to apply their own rules. When they come, it's just you go boom, just like that. I hope we can work more, delegate, kind of partnership. Every time we pass the money, every 3 months, probably, you should ask for a report what's going on. If you ask money for paper, you want to find out, if they little by spending money for this paper, kind of more communication, little teamwork, probably better, because this look very confused to all the city, even to ourselves, even we look we don't know exactly what we're doing. Every time you guys come here, ask for money, here you go, we pass the money, then overstart, we find out there's a lot of problems. Does not looking good to us. Look like we shouldn't even qualify to be in those rules, deal with the money from the taxpayer. Because you don't want to, hire somebody to deal with your money, doesn't know exactly what you're doing. That's all I have to say tonight.
I agree with that sentiment. I would draw a distinction between the operation here and what we've experienced at the schools. Again, I would urge you to check your email boxes when you get home tonight and look at the level of detail that we maintain information on the city side. That you will go and see, as of today, to the dollar, how much is being spent in each department versus what the money that you appropriated, what our revenues are to date versus what we projected. And so the level of detail is significant and the accountability is there. And what we're trying to do is to bring that level of accountability to the school department.
And to be more transparency. Thank you so much, and I appreciate it. That's all I have it. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor, and I'm glad you didn't get arrested for any of the things that you were saying.
Wait.
Counselor, just before Counselor Teixeira goes, I just want to remind everybody that we still have an agenda item that's probably going to take some time, so if we could just kind of refocus our questions or comments to what's already been said so that we don't go beyond, because it's already almost 9 o'clock and we don't want to pull another all-nighter like we did. Counselor Teixeira.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Clerk, to be here, and I'll make it quick. You got enough tonight. I did get the email. I just bought this from my colleague, Castro. I see some of the item here. Some of it's like over 100%, and we still got like 4 months to go. Some of it's like on 90%. What are we gonna do, like on those item line? Like, for instance, there's one 145% overspend already. So what we're gonna do? Are you gonna come back before us?
So there are very few examples where and I mentioned that in the email, the most prominent, you're talking about the city budget report, right? Not the schools? Okay.
Not the schools.
So there are a couple of instances, most specifically, the law department had court-ordered settlements that they were court-ordered to pay, and so those settlements have been paid, and so those numbers are reflected in your budget report. And yes, as I noted in the email transmitting that budget report to you, we will be seeking transfers to cover those costs, and we're legally required to pay those, which is why those amounts were exceeded. There are others that are close to 100%. Some of them we will not be seeking transfers. For instance, a lot of those costs are front-loaded, or union contract costs for stipends or educational incentives. So some of those numbers are close to 100%, but those amounts have been totally expended for the year. So we will not require transfers for those. But as I mentioned in the email, if you have any specific questions, I think I'm happy to answer them tonight, but I came prepared to talk about the schools. That is a different topic, but as you all know, I am more than happy to discuss in detail that budget report. And as I said, we've been producing that for a couple of years now. We're happy to provide it on a monthly basis if you find it useful.
My other question, are you willing to produce on the school side?
Well, but that's the essence of the challenge that we have. As I've mentioned, the records on the school side are not as accurate as those. And so we produce a report for the schools that I'll gladly provide you of what's in Munis, but there is not a correlation between what's in that Munis report and what the school committee voted. So that's one of the challenges that we face, is that the very underpinning of the school maintenance of information is not as accurate and as accountable as what you have that I provided you on the city side. That is the essence of our challenge.
All right, thank you, Mr. Clerk. Thank you, President.
Thank you, Counselor. Now, I guess we'll go to second rounds with Thompson, Farwell, and Minicelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, Mr. Clarkson. Again, I kind of limited my discussion before because I was expecting Mr. Plant to be here, and I was a little surprised. Well, I learned that he wasn't, so I kind of reserved some of my questions. But since we all kind of got into it tonight, I'll take the opportunity to ask a few. Number one, just under the scope of this resolved before us. I know I've been talking to you, talking with other councilors regarding the merger aspect, right? About what can we do to make our operations a little more efficient, reduce the, as Councilor Griffin said, the duplicity between the school side and the city side. And it was my understanding that a lot of this could be done under 7137M. I'm understanding that potentially we're looking at home rule petitions. But the discussion that is being held, and that's kind of where I want to just briefly, the conversations about merging departments or becoming a little more streamlined in, let's say, our administrative functions, our financing functions, HR, and all these payroll and everything else. Is that contemplated under 37M, or are we looking at a completely different way to accomplish that goal?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but from my opinion, having gone through the process of 37M, it can be accomplished through that process, most definitely. It can also be accomplished through a home rule petition. So either is an effective way to affect administrative change.
Now, 37M obviously has to be, whatever we come up with, we could come up with the most efficient way to operate both a city and school department under one roof. But if the school committee doesn't affirmatively vote for it, it's a moot point. And so, that's potentially a challenge before us. But secondly, if we do go the home rule petition, we would essentially be, forcing it on the school department. And but that's I would say, is that a multi-year process to get a home rule petition in, or it's...
I think that's a question for our legislators, right? It doesn't have to be a multi-year process. I guess you could characterize it as forcing it on them, or you could characterize it as using the appropriate authority of the legislature to take action that needs to be taken. And so I'm not quarreling with you in the least, but I'm offering a different perspective. I think we're all frustrated that we've been having these conversations since August, right? So maybe some drastic but appropriate measures like a home rule petition are appropriate to move things forward.
I don't disagree, and if home rule petition seems to be the only way forward, then I would definitely support that. But if we could accomplish the same under 37M, I think that might be a little quicker and at least get some buy-in on the school side for that issue. You just kind of brought up a great point. We've been talking about this since August of last year, and you keep mentioning a lot of the inefficiencies that you're finding, throughout the school department, the way they're budgeting, the way that they use Munis. Everybody had access to the credit card, and I know you've tightened up, some of those issues. But it's you said earlier regarding that the policy and how you implement a grant and then close out that grant and make sure that grant is only paying for the services or personnel that's covered under that grant. And, we had this chaotic way of putting in grants and never closing them out, paying out of a grant that doesn't exist, and all of that. Is that still happening? Or, I know you're looking at everything. I know you're trying to get to a resolution, but where the budget, we're almost at the end of the fiscal year. I think TJ, in his last presentation before the school committee, he threw out a number. He said that potentially we're looking at a $15 million deficit for fiscal year 24. Now he was a little hesitant to give that number because of the ebbs and flows of money in, money out, and nothing's really certain. But at that time, he did state that he was within a week or so of really kind of locking down that number. Has that number been locked in yet, to your knowledge?
No, I think he's close, but I think that's the work that he's completing to provide to DESE, and once he does that, he's assured us that he'll provide it to us, and believe me, we will provide it to you. But that's the essence of what we're facing. So we're still triaging and trying to, because of the lack of record keeping, are still trying very hard. And I don't want anyone to come away from this meeting thinking that the people working over at the business office in the school department don't do a good job. They are extremely dedicated, hard-working people. But they are triaging and trying to stop the bleeding with limited staff, right? There's 70 work hours a week that are not occurring from people that are on leave, and other people who have left and not being replaced. And so all of the normal operations have to go on. And despite all of these challenges, the priority still must be putting teachers in the classroom to educate our kids. And so that has to maintain its prominence. And then not only do the bills have to get paid and the teachers have to get paid and the lights have to be kept on, but we got to try to figure out the nature of this deficit for '23, how we're doing in '24, and build a budget from essentially nothing for '25. So it is a tremendous effort. And for those of us on the city side that are supporting the schools, there's also a city to be run here. And believe me, we are not overstaffed by any means on the city side and trying to deal with our own financial challenges as a result of the money we expended to bail out the schools.
Right, and I am not making any, dispersions about the effort. Believe me, Mr. Clarkson, I understand the effort. We talk about this often. This has been a matter before this city for the past 8 months now, and I don't think it's a lack of effort. I think ultimately it becomes what are the results of that effort. And right now, I don't know if we completely have our mind around, what are the results. Where could potentially looking at what TJ was talking about the other day was that we're potentially looking at a $15 million deficit, but again, that's in flux. A lot of that derives out of our out-of-district transportation budget. Now, what's a resolution to out of district? I mean, we're still responsible for these kids that are potentially homeless or residing in another district. We got to bring them in. Is there a time limit that ceases after a school year, that now they can be used for the city that they actually reside in? Or, because it doesn't seem, when it comes to special ed, we're not getting the reimbursement from the state for the full costs of what it costs to educate a special ed student. And it seems like we are the #1 leader in special ed students, maybe in the Commonwealth. And so those numbers keep going up. Our ESL students keep going up. The transportation deficit of, I believe our non-net allotment was $11 million, and that Mr. Plant said that potentially we're looking at a $22 million cost. So that's an $11 million deficit in our transportation budget. We've all said it. There's no money left, and we're coming up on crunch time. And so I'm scared. I'm scared that we're going to find ourselves in a deficit. We're going to find ourselves without the means to cover that deficit. And then what happens then? Essentially, the state comes in and takes over, or we'll have to have that discussion when it comes. But this fiscal year, we need to have a better understanding of where we're at. And so for tomorrow, when you're in front of the school committee, is it your intent to basically conduct that triage, maybe cut off a limb to save the body? Is that what we're looking at?
Well, I have to say, Mr. Chairman, and I'm more than happy to answer that question, and I've answered all the questions tonight. I would suggest we've gone way far afield of the issue before us, which was to conduct an administrative review of the schools. But let me answer the question. I don't hold the scalpel. So what I'm going to do tomorrow night is make very specific recommendations to the school committee or the elected representatives to take action. Very specific action as it relates to transportation. The way that those vans are contracted, I think, is far less than optimal. And the level of specificity that is put into those contracts is not something that I normally would see in the course of my work over the last 30 years. And so I'm going to offer very specific recommendations
for them to vote on that night.
I can't tell you that, Councilor. That I'm going to offer specific recommendations for action to be taken. But I don't want anyone to be under the mistaken impression that somehow that's going to end up in results. I don't possess that authority. Regardless of what authority you think I might have to oversee, I'm not an elected school committee member, and I'm not the superintendent. I worked my tail off for the last several months to try to bring accountability over there. But at the end of the day, there are people in this dynamic who need to act. And I will make some recommendations for action tomorrow night. and that's the best I can do.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, and I look forward to listening tomorrow for those recommendations and to see what the result is. See if the school committee, the superintendent take action. You know, we unfortunately we already have one superintendent sitting on the sideline, and if we, you know, it's
Counselor, let's just.
Understood.
We don't want to put the CFO in a position.
No, I understand. It's we just wrote a check for $9 million, ultimately $18 million a few weeks ago, and I think we're going to find ourselves in the same situation. There is no money left, and you know, we're going to see the state essentially come in.
What we might want to do is perhaps submit, put in another resolve, because I think one of the things that we need to look at is that, and I mentioned that to you a few minutes ago, we're out here talking about FY25, where the building that's burning is FY24. And it's not in front of us to discuss, so perhaps what we need to do is put another resolve and bring the appropriate people in front of us to discuss this.
So, yeah, let's consider this ringing the alarm.
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I like that. Councilor Fowler.
Okay, returning to the original agenda item, if I can. My suggestion is we wait for the investigation and the audit to be done. We take the facts and the evidence that are presented to us in that investigation and audit. And then we can call in the appropriate people, ask the appropriate questions, and devise strategies that will prevent us from getting involved in this type of situation again. With respect to Mr. Plant, my understanding is he was charged with a financial audit and investigation. He was not looking at the organizational structure of the Brockton Public Schools. Is that correct? So whatever report he issues, he's not going to come out and say, well, you can eliminate this position and this position and this position. My understanding is he's going to tell us where funds were expended, where we went over in terms of what was appropriated, and that's what caused the deficit. Have I got that right?
I think you're absolutely correct, Councillor, for the contract with DESE. However, the new contract with the Brockton Public Schools does have some of that in the scope.
And that leads me into what I agree with Councilor Minicello about. If we go forward and have an independent, objective, outside firm come in, absolutely use the data. Take a look at student achievement, test scores, the demographics of the city, the composition of the student body, the socioeconomic factors that influence the families who live here. Put all that together, synthesize it, shake it up, and then come out with, this is what your school system should look like, because you have all of these factors, all of these data elements that you should consider when you put together your school structure. Do we need 4 deans for the different academic houses if we have them? Maybe we should have a dean of students and then have somebody under that person. I don't know. I'm not in favor of the Mass Association of School Superintendents. That's a professional organization of school superintendents, and I don't want to say they protect their own, but they protect their own. They're going to support superintendents and what superintendents want to do. I'm trying to depoliticize, be objective, be open-minded, and have someone come in here and take all of the data, which Councilor Minicello mentioned, and what we have now, and tell us what we need going forward. And by the way, this resolve doesn't mandate this. If this receives a favorable recommendation and goes back and the council votes for it, it's still entirely up to the mayor. I can't force him to issue an RFP. I can't force him to fund anything. I'm just trying to raise the level of discussion here, because it seems to me we have a financial dilemma, but we also may have an organizational structure challenge here. And I'd like to try to address both. And I thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Councilor. I think Councilor Minicello, you were the last one.
Yeah, just as a brief follow-up. We knew about this in August. You were before us in October. We knew that at the time there needed to be an appropriate checks and balances put in place. We talked about how complicated this budget is and how the schools spend and the different accounts that are involved. If we get into a situation where fiscal 2024 is over budget by about the same numbers. There's no excuse for that, because we knew that we had to put something in place to prevent 23 happening in 24. We knew, yes, there was an audit going on, but that didn't mean that we couldn't put into place some reconciliation measures that monitored how much money the schools have and what's being spent and what it's being spent on, to make sure those accounts are being spent, the money's being spent out of the correct accounts. We can't continue to let checks be written that we're not sure if there's going to be money to pay them. And if the school committee, who has the obligation to oversee this budget, isn't doing their job, then we need to go into the courts to get an injunction, to get involved in this thing, because there's no excuse for us having 2 years of a $14 million deficit. It's unconscionable. And if we don't do something fast, this thing could roll away from us and get even larger. The people had we had an obligation to the people back in October when we spoke about this, and we said that we were going to review what's going on, review the reconciliations. I asked the question about how this happened, and the answer was basically, well, monies keep flowing in, invoices come in, and they just get paid. Well, okay, that's what was going on then. But there had to be a time where we say, well, okay, wait a minute. What monies are being spent on what items? That should have been done. I don't see why that can't be done or wasn't done. If I'm wrong, tell me, Mr. Clarkson, but I just don't understand why in October we didn't say, okay, fiscal 2024 started July 1st. We were only 2 months into it. Only 2 months into it when we found out there was an issue. So, wasn't there time to put something together to basically see what the school budget was, see what needed to be spent over the year, make sure that the bills that are being submitted are being paid from the right accounts? I think that if we did that, we wouldn't be in this situation right now. Or if they're going to go over budget because of transportation, we would at least know, okay, this is what we allocated for this year. But because programs were moved out of the district, they're going to cost more. So I just don't understand how this is happening again when we knew that this was a behemoth. We knew that this is a complicated monster. The audit is one thing, but putting in some fiscal controls is another. And those fiscal controls, I think, should have been in place between our meeting in October and today, so that we have an idea of what the end result's going to be. I don't understand why we don't know how much the school's going to spend this year. We should know how much is left in their budget. We should know what it is they've contracted for. So we should be able to say, okay, this is what they spent. We should have put a stop to it a lot earlier. But it's now at this point. We should be able to know today what we're going to spend by June 30th. This is not good.
Well, Councilman Minichiello, perhaps what we want to do is file a resolve and bring the superintendent of schools in front of this body. Hey, listen, it's very simple. He comes, or there's no budget for next year.
I agree,
because I think one of the issues that we need to discuss is FY. I know that we have an audit going on, we have all these investigations going on, but that's for 23. And 24 we're not talking about. And this is March 4 today, so in 14 days, we can have the appropriate person here to say, it's March, put some things in place at least until June that can save the system some funds. You know, perhaps that's what we ought to do, because as the CFO has said several times, that, you know, some of the work that needs to be done is beyond his purview.
I agree, but
It's also not in front of
the interim
And it's also, as the clerk reminds me, it's also not on the item that we're discussing.
Well, it is, because fiscal '24 is mentioned to make sure this is their annual budget review for the school appropriations. So this relates to appropriations. The new superintendent, the interim superintendent, his first challenge should have been getting control over the budget.
Well, let's ask him to come to our next FinCom and see how we can take care of this.
But if
you want to co-sponsor the resolve, I'll co-sponsor it with you.
That's fine, Mr. President. I just can't believe that we're at a juncture where we might be writing another check, and we might not even have the funds to write this other check.
No, there will be no 25.
But to allow the school committee to spend monies that they don't have and then present the city with a bill is unconscionable.
You're going to co-sponsor that resolve?
Mr. Chairman, on the narrow issue of having the mayor and the chief financial officer discuss and consider the feasibility of an outside audit on the organizational structure of the schools, I would move that this be recommended favorably to the council.
Second.
On that narrow issue, just that narrow issue.
Well, a motion has been properly made in second. All those in favor? All those against? Opposed? It carries. Thank you, Mr. Clerk, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. President, thank you, committee members, thank you.
Mr. Clerk, the last item on the agenda.
Just before I get to the last item, I'd like to ask your indulgence for a moment, because I know the last item will take us a while and will move us out of this room.
You sure you don't want to do it at the end of the...
We won't be coming back at the end, but as most of you know that I told you last week, tonight is the last night for your aide for the Finance Committee, Taylor Bennett, who is leaving to take a nice job down in Middleborough as the assistant clerk. And I just, before we leave and go into executive session on another item, I wanted to thank her for all her work and give you a chance to thank her yourselves. So thank you, Taylor, for the great work.
Mr. Clerk, do you think we ought to put in a resolve or an order for these cities and towns to stop taking our good people?
Our people, exactly. Don't worry, Diane's staying here with all of us, so we'll be in good hands.
Number 8, sir.
8, resolved, be it resolved to have City Solicitor Megan Bridges or her designee appear before the Finance Committee of the Brockton City Council to give an update on the status of the City of Brockton's audit slash investigation of the Brockton School Department's overspending of their FY23 budget and any information concerning any other fiscal years that may include pertinent information. It invited Megan Bridges, City Solicitor, or designees. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. And folks, the reason for us going into executive session is to discuss the legal counsel, the litigating position of the city relative to this item. And since this is still an ongoing investigation, where whatever we discuss in this particular session, if we do it publicly, may have an effect on the investigation, the body will not return to an open session at the end of the executive session. And Mr. Clerk,
actually, we need a motion to go to executive session.
Motion to go into executive session.
Second.
A motion has been properly made in second. All those in favor?
We need a roll call vote.
Roll call.
Azak.
Yes.
Durenencourt.
Yes.
Farwell.
Yes.
Griffin.
Yes.
Lally.
Yes.
Minicello.
Yes.
Nicastro.
Yes.
Rodriguez.
Yes.
Tavares.
Yes.
Texera.
Yes.
Thompson.
Yes.
11 in the affirmative.
The motion carries, and if we have no further business of this committee to discuss, I will adjourn this meeting.